why would the president invoke wartime authority? Because he wants to bypass constitutional principles like due process, the separation of powers, and federalism. This administration has sent nearly 300 people to a dangerous and brutal prison in El Salvador. They claim these individuals are all criminals and gang members. That is not the reality. Take gay makeup artist Andre Hernandez Romero, who the administration said was a gang member because he had crown tattoos above tattoos reading Mom and Dad. He deserved a chance to prove his innocence. Instead, he's stuck in a foreign prison, subject to abuse and far away from his family. A photojournalist who visited the prison said that he witnessed Andre sobbing uncontrollably, praying and calling out for his mother as guards dragged him down a hallway. As Andre's lawyer said, if they can do this to him, they can do it to anyone. Green card holders, U.S. citizens, anyone. Indeed, President Trump has threatened to send, quote, homegrown criminals to El Salvador next. This administration has also used immigrants to attack the First Amendment rights to free speech and peaceful protest, all in an attempt to silence those who disagree with him. In March, we saw the horrifying video of masked federal agents swarming and arresting an international student. What was the crime? Writing an op-ed in a student newspaper that did not align with the administration's political views. The Trump administration has shown they are willing to break the law to carry out mass deportation. They failed to comply with court orders, fired federal workers without process required by law, unlawfully gutted oversight offices that play a critical role in ensuring humane treatment of detainees. Let me be clear. We need to arrest and deport dangerous immigrants who commit crimes, and we must secure our borders. But in America, we believe that everyone deserves a chance to prove their innocence and access a fair trial. We all have the right to express our political opinions and even to disagree with the government. Those are our fundamental rights as Americans, but just look at the president's willingness to escalate and inflame protests in California. Listen to his expressed desire to send Americans to a brutal foreign prison. This president won't stop at immigrants. Any of us could be next. If the president doesn't like our laws, he should come to Congress and work with us to fix our broken immigration system. Poll after poll shows that Americans on both sides of the aisle support establishing a path to citizenship for dreamers, improving our legal immigration system, granting status to those who have been paying taxes and have committed no crime. Many of my Republican colleagues have told me we needed to secure the border before we could address these challenges. Well, the president has said that the border is now secure. So instead of ripping apart families, instead of sending U.S. citizen children to a country they've never known, instead of baselessly accusing asylum seekers of gang affiliations and tossing them into a foreign prison, instead of shredding First Amendment rights, it is time for Republicans to come to the table and negotiate a bipartisan solution that works for all Americans and upholds our nation's most cherished and fundamental freedoms. Now I'm going to recognize Senator Alex Padilla of California, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Border Security and Immigration, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, and welcome everybody. I'm grateful for this opportunity to make an opening statement for today's Spotlight hearing, as you have entitled, "The Trump Administration's Abuse of Immigrants to Attack Our Constitutional Order." As you all know, it's particularly timely given what's happening in my home state of California. You know, proud to have been born and raised in Los Angeles, and I can tell you that Angelenos have a long history of speaking up for ourselves and for our communities and for the most vulnerable in our community. We've seen that tradition continue this past week as Angelenos have spoken up against the extreme actions of the Trump administration. And yes, while a small number of bad actors have sought to exploit the peaceful protests and have engaged in violence and vandalism, the overwhelming majority of activity has been peaceful and protected by the First Amendment. Even law enforcement officials will tell you the folks they see doing maybe some looting at night is a very different group of people than the organizers and activists and marchers that they see peacefully protesting during the day. So it is important for us to condemn all forms of violence and to urge everyone listening to keep peacefully protesting, keep raising your voices against this administration's unprecedented overreach. But let's not play into Trump's hands. See, Donald Trump created this chaos. He inflamed this violence, and he did it intentionally. He sent federal agents in to terrorize communities and then turned around and blamed state and local leaders for the very chaos that he unleashed. So today, I want to be clear not only about what is going on, but why it's happening. See, last week marked one of the lowest points in the Trump administration. His trade wars are failing in court, while American families continue to get crushed by rising costs. He's failed miserably to make good on his promise to end the Russian invasion of Ukraine on day one. He's been handed loss after loss in federal court on a number of issues. His signature tax bill, one to give further tax breaks to billionaires at the expense of working families, is hitting a wall of public resistance as more Americans learn about the proposal's massive cuts to health care, nutrition assistance, and more. And most embarrassing of all, maybe the personal one, his breakup with his billionaire best friend Elon Musk. By last Friday, Trump was drowning in negative headlines. And so just as he's done throughout the years, when all else fails, when everything is going bad, he turns to the same tired playbook. Attack immigrants. Blame immigrants. And manufacture a crisis to try to change the news cycle. So on Friday, he ordered these ICE raids across California. Think about it. You saw the images. Agents in full combat gear. Not just targeting violent criminals. That's what he talked about during the campaign. What he's done in practice is very different. They're sweeping through workplaces and small businesses in communities throughout Los Angeles and elsewhere. And so, yes, when Californians took to the streets to peacefully protest, he then escalated the situation, bypassing the governor and local leaders by federalizing and deploying the National Guard. The first time a president has done so since 1965. Think President Lyndon Johnson and the Civil Rights Movement. And since then, Trump has arrested SEIU California President David Huerta for peacefully protesting and charging him with, quote, conspiracy to impede an officer. That's not what happened. We all saw the video. He's threatened to arrest the governor of California. And now he's mobilized hundreds of Marines to deploy to Los Angeles without providing any factual or valid justification to do so. This is dangerous territory. Servicewomen and men are trained to fight wars overseas, not to police communities here in the United States. But that's exactly what Donald Trump wants. He wants to create theatrics. He wants a viral clip of a protest turned chaotic so he can justify his crackdown on immigrants and distract from his own failures. He's testing the boundaries of his power. And my message to the country today is this: what's happening in California is not just a threat to California. It's not just a threat to immigrant communities. It's a threat to everybody. Because an attack on anyone's rights is an attack on everyone's rights. And no matter where you live or what's your background, don't think that anybody is insulated from Trump's actions. If Donald Trump can bypass the governor of California to activate the National Guard and suppress immigrant rights, he'll do whatever he wants to suppress other rights too. And if he can deploy Marines to Los Angeles, he can deploy them to any city in America. And if he can bypass due process, declare lawful residents, quote, criminals, subject to deportation, and disappear them to foreign countries without even giving them an opportunity to make their case, what's to stop him from doing the same to any of us. California is nothing but Trump's test case for the rest of the country. We can't let him get away with it. We won't let him get away with it. So we need to push back and demand accountability before it's too late. And I want to take a moment to just thank all the witnesses in particular for your time and your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. From the other end of the country, from the state of Vermont, I recognize our colleague, Senator Welch.
Well, I agree with the remarks of Senator Durbin and Senator Padilla, so I won't repeat all of them, but I'll just express what I think the two issues are that really are poignant and powerful at the moment. One is due process, and we all are committed to the right every person has to a hearing before they're subject to arbitrary authority of a government, any government, including our government. And that is under attack now. And I know you're going to be speaking to that, but that is absolutely unacceptable. Due process has been our foundation. It is the right of all of us to have a hearing, and we've got to protect that. Second is immigration policy. That is a very difficult, contentious issue. It has been throughout our history. But here's what's going on. Number one, there is a secure border now. The number of crossings at the southern border are a trickle. And that's a good thing. People support that. Second, deporting criminals. People support that with due process. What is going on now is a politicization, as Senator Padilla said, of immigration as an excuse to bully your way into a debate and a threat of arrest of the California governor. The reality is what is now supposedly about immigration is really about a mass roundup of people at their workplaces. It includes dreamers, people who came here through no agency of their own, but by their parents. Many of those folks went on to serve as police officers in the military. In Vermont, we have one who graduated from the University of Vermont Medical School. And it is a policy that is all about the political agenda of the president as opposed to providing any enhanced security and safety for the people of this country. Not to mention, it has dire economic implications. So that's what's going on, and let's name it and call it what it is. So, Senator Durbin, I really appreciate you calling this hearing, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Let me introduce our excellent witnesses. The first is Himea Arias Cristobal, 19-year-old dreamer, proud daughter and big sister, and avid runner, recipient of the Dream U.S. Scholarship, currently pursuing a degree in finance and economics with a minor in marketing at Dalton State College, brought to the U.S. at age 4 to Dalton, Georgia. Our second witness is Rebecca Tostado, a whistleblower who's on administrative leave from the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, where she served for nearly 22 years under Republicans and Democrats. Most recently, she served as acting director of the immigration section in that office. Third witness, Laura Smith, executive director, supervising attorney at the Children's Legal Center of Chicago, an organization that represents families seeking asylum, children who've been abused, abandoned, neglected, victims of human trafficking, and victims of domestic violence. Fourth witness, Michelle Brane, is that correct? Good. Michelle Brane, Executive Director of Together and Free, a nonprofit organization that supplies support services to asylum-seeking families. Michelle previously served as Immigration Detention Ombudsman at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and as Executive Director for the department's Family Reunification Task Force. Final witness, Mary McCord, Executive Director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection and a visiting professor of law at the highly respected Georgetown Law School. She previously served as Acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security and Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice. Before we turn to our witnesses, let me briefly lay out the procedure we'll follow. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement, then a round of questions. Each senator will have 5 minutes to ask questions. We'd like people to stay close to their allotted time if possible. Ms. Cristobal, you may proceed with your opening statement. Make sure the microphone is pulled up close to your face.
There you go. Good afternoon, Ranking Member Durbin and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Himea Arias Cristobal. I am a 19-year-old, a daughter, sister, and an avid runner. On May 5th, I was pulled over for allegedly turning right at a no turn on red sign. What began as a simple traffic stop quickly escalated. I was taken to Whitfield County Jail, where I stayed for 2 days. While I was there, I learned I was being transferred to Stewart Detention Center, where my father was already being held. Before I share what happened during my time in detention, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. My parents and I came to the U.S. in 2010 when I was just 4 years old. For over 15 years, I've called this country and Georgia home. I grew up in Dalton and went through the public school system from kindergarten through high school graduation. I was an honor student, active in sports, volunteering, and students' clubs. After high school, I attended Oglethorpe University in Atlanta, thanks to a scholarship from the Dream.US. I ran cross country and pursued my education. I later transferred to Dalton State College, where I'm currently working my degree in finance and economics with a minor in marketing. Since kindergarten, I've pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States. My dream is to one day become a U.S. citizen. I was not eligible for DACA, but if I had been, I would have applied without hesitation. What happened to me is not rare. It's part of a growing pattern that is both scary and un-American, and I know I am not alone in thinking that. I live in an overwhelmingly conservative community, yet when I was taken to Stewart, all my neighbors, even the conservative ones, rallied for me. As a teenager, being held in jail, even just for 2 days, was traumatizing. I was surrounded by people who had committed serious crimes, but what left the deepest mark on me was the transfer, being shackled at the wrist, waist, and ankles. That is something I will never forget. It was dehumanizing. And what's worse is knowing that millions of others have experienced and will continue to experience the same trauma. My time at Stewart Detention Center was life-altering. Stewart is a private detention facility known for its mistreatment of immigrants. Detention centers are supposed to be temporary holding spaces while people determine their legal options, but at Stewart, we are treated like criminals. The conditions, the language used towards us, the lack of dignity and compassion, it felt more like punishment than due process. Due process is supposed to mean fairness under the law, but inside Stewart, people are denied the basic right. We are left in the dark about our cases. Legal help was scarce. We were treated not like individuals with rights, but like numbers in a system designed to break us. I was held at Stewart for 2.5 weeks before being granted a minimum bond of $1,500, thanks to my incredible attorney, Dustin Baxter. My time there was short compared to others, but the emotional weight was unbearable. I witnessed mothers, daughters, and sisters suffer daily under cruel and unnecessary conditions. What's happening inside detention centers like Stewart is not just a legal issue, it is a human rights issue. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share my story, but my story is just one of many. Every day across this country, people, many who have lived here nearly their whole lives, are being detained without access to fair legal representation, without proper care, and without the basic dignity all people deserve. I am not just an immigrant. I am a human being. I am a Georgian, and I am an American without papers. I hope my story opens eyes and hearts to what really is happening, not just to me, but to thousands of others. No one should have to go through what I did. We need a system that reflects our values of justice, dignity, and due process. Instead of arrests and detentions and threats of deportation, wouldn't it be better if we had the chance to become legal American citizens? Thank you so much for listening, for caring, and for taking action.
And thank you for your powerful testimony. Thank you for being here today. Ms. Tostado?
Ranking Member Durbin, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear at this forum. My name is Rebecca Tostado. I joined the Department of Homeland Security Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, or CRCL, in 2003. That was nearly 22 years ago. Like many others at the time, I wanted to help secure the nation after the devastating attacks of September 11. I am appearing today as a whistleblower represented by the Government Accountability Project to highlight the congressionally mandated responsibilities that, to my knowledge, have ceased or have been significantly reduced since the Department of Homeland Security effectively eliminated CRCL through a purported reduction in force on March 21st, 2025. I was one of more than 30 anonymous whistleblowers from CRCL who submitted protected disclosures to Congress on May 15, 2025, raising concerns about the manner and consequences of this administration's actions to eliminate the office. While I was previously anonymous, I made the decision to come forward at this time. Since I joined the Department of Homeland Security, I have worked alongside the presidentially appointed officer for the office in every administration to carry out the office's statutory responsibilities. I have worked to ensure that the department treats all persons interacting with DHS in accordance with the law. I have worked on addressed issues such as the department's cruel separation of families, inhumane treatment of unaccompanied children, including children who have disabilities, the failure to provide accommodations for people of all faiths, detention of families, and inadequate language access for speakers of indigenous languages. During one investigation at a family detention facility a number of years ago, I observed an infant who was completely listless in his mother's arms. CRCL's medical expert, who was on site with our staff at the time, asked for the infant's his medical records and found that he had lost nearly 32% of his body weight in over 10 days because of simple diarrheal disease, but was never taken to an emergency room or given an IV. That infant received medical care, and the department ceased holding any families at the facility after our review. Congress established the Officer for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties as part of DHS when it enacted the Homeland Security Act of 2002. The officer is charged with ensuring that the department complies with constitutional, statutory, regulatory, policy, and other requirements relating to the civil rights and civil liberties of individuals affected by the programs and activities of the department. This and all other statutory work appeared to stop on March 21st, 2025, after DHS officials informed me and my colleagues that our positions at CRCL were being eliminated. On that same day, a spokesperson for the department issued a statement saying CRCL and the other oversight offices obstructed immigration enforcement by adding bureaucratic hurdles and undermining the mission of DHS. CRCL was and is crucial to the department's mission. In our work, we have sought to minimize the department's risk of violating the Constitution, and we have collaborated with departmental components, making recommendations to make operations safer, more efficient, and respectful of individual rights. The department's actions on March 21st resulted in the office ceasing to investigate more than 500 open complaint investigations. These include, for example, complaints about sexual abuse and deaths in custody. Other CRCL responsibilities and functions were halted on that day, such as EEO responsibilities, implementation of the Violence Against Women Act, and oversight of ICE's 287G program. Required reports to Congress are pending. If CRCL were operating as it should now, it likely would have received and sought to address allegations about the kind of conduct that had prompted the hearing this afternoon. After the filing of a lawsuit challenging the elimination of CRCL and the two other oversight offices, a department official testified in that case that CRCL would be reconstituted. Asked by the judge if there was a plan for this, the department official said he had a notion of a plan. The department official subsequently provided a declaration to the court in which he stated that CRCL would consist of 22 employees and some contractual support. The concerning activities described, Ms. Himea has described today, and others that you will hear, I think explain that oversight is needed more now than ever. I'm deeply concerned that without a functioning CRCL, the guardrails that Congress established to ensure that DHS abides by the Constitution will be removed. We urge Congress to investigate the department's decision regarding CRCL and how the office's statutory mission to protect constitutional rights will be carried out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tostado. Ms. Smith?
My name is Laura Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Children's Legal Center, an organization providing immigration legal services to children and families. I'm testifying today to tell the story of Mr. F., a father of 3 children and a Venezuelan that the U.S. government has been holding in detention despite a court order calling for his release on bond. Mr. F. entered the United States after being fingerprinted and background checked by immigration authorities. He was granted permission to enter the U.S. He followed the law. He applied for a TPS and asylum. He's simply a father who loves and strives to care for his young children. He has no criminal history, has done nothing wrong, and yet he is now faced with 2 horrifying options: either to disappear into a prison in El Salvador where he will never see his children again, or stay indefinitely in a prison here in the U.S. with no foreseeable release date. Let me tell you his story. My organization was assigned to provide legal services to 2 young children, ages 10 and 12 years old, who were released from or our custody to their father, Mr. F. On March 21st, ICE arrived at their home in Illinois, seemingly to be performing a wellness check on Mr. F's 2 children. During this wellness check, they arrested and detained Mr. F in front of his children. The reason for Mr. F's arrest was unknown, but based on the information I have available to me today, the visit was not to ensure the wellness of his children. The children called our office, terrified and confused. These young children had no idea why their father was just arrested and taken away from them. I do not know exactly why Mr. F was arrested. However, after his arrest, DHS took a picture of Mr. F and posted it on social media, claiming to have arrested a member of Tren de Aragua. Mr. F also learned that his bank accounts, which contained money to care for his minor children, were frozen. Mr. F was taken to a detention center in Wisconsin. Our office sent documents for our client to sign, documents ICE requires to confirm our representation in their system. Before we even received the documents back, we learned that he had been moved from Wisconsin to Illinois and then to Texas. We feared that he was being taken to Seca in El Salvador and that his children would never see him again. We quickly filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus and asked for an emergency temporary order to prevent Mr. F's removal from the United States. The federal court quickly granted our request and also ordered the U.S. government to provide Mr. F and his counsel, me, with notice of any Alien Enemies Act designation. To this day, the U.S. government has not provided me with any notice. While all of this was occurring, DHS initiated a case in the immigration court to remove Mr. F from the United States. We've had multiple hearings in which the detention center did not allow Mr. F to even appear in his own case. DHS never alleged in court that Mr. F is a member of any gang or committed any crime. In fact, the immigration court ordered that ICE release Mr. F on bond, finding that he is not a danger to the community. The next day, a U.S. citizen and family friend posted the bond for Mr. F for the ICE to release him on bond. ICE denied the posting of the bond. The U.S. citizen then posted the bond again with a better picture of her passport. ICE denied the posting of the bond again, claiming that Mr. F cannot be released on bond despite the immigration judge's order to do so. Later, the family hired a local bonds attorney who regularly posts bond at the Bluebonnet Detention Center where Mr. F is located. ICE also denied this posting of the bond and for the first time cited national security reasons. I then flew to Texas to visit Mr. F at the Bluebonnet Detention Center. During this meeting, for the first time, Mr. F shared a single piece of paper with me stating that he was being designated a member of Tren de Aragua and was being removed under the Alien Enemies Act. ICE and counsel for the U.S. government had never given me this paper in response to my requests or even during any of Mr. F's immigration court proceedings, despite having been ordered to do so by the federal court. Although I am listed as his attorney of record, they did not allow him to share the paper with me until I visited a month later. The notice contains no factual allegations to even understand why the U.S. government has detained him and determined that he is a member of Tren de Aragua. I struggled to explain to Mr. F why he was arrested in front of his children, detained in a prison for over 2 months, and falsely accused of being a member of Tren de Aragua without any notice as to why he was being considered a gang member or any opportunity to respond to the accusations. Recently, I met with Mr. F's 2 children, ages 10 and 12. I also had the unfortunate job of explaining to them that their father may be transferred to SECA in El Salvador despite having done nothing wrong. I used colored markers on a whiteboard to explain to these young children where our government's laws have failed their family and that these 2 children may never see their father again. I am a U.S. citizen and I am scared. Due process prevents the government from arresting us for no reason and putting us in prison indefinitely. If the government is not following the law and is violating people's constitutional rights, then we are all in danger of suffering the same fate as Mr. F.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Brane.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. My name is Michelle Brane. I'm the Executive Director of Together and Free. Before this role, I served as the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, and before that, as the head of the Family Reunification Task Force at the Department of Homeland Security. We're currently seeing a dramatic increase in immigration enforcement and detention without adequate oversight. And this is leading to the denial of due process, harm to families, and real, tangible risks to our communities. Congress established the Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman in 2019 to independently examine detention conditions and promote humane treatment. We worked directly with ICE, CBP, detainees, and families to find practical solutions that make sense for all parties involved. Our team of over 100 staff visited any detention facility with more than 50 detainees on a weekly basis, and we resolved more than 11,000 complaints in 2024 alone. But on March 21st, 2025, DHS shut down OIDO and fired all its employees without warning. Overnight, case managers stopped visiting facilities, complaints were no longer answered, inspections went unfinished, and unresolved issues were left behind. DHS later claimed that a team of just 5 to 7 staff could replace the work of these over 100 staff. This is simply not credible. OIDO's presence wasn't just about paperwork, it was about people. And our work made immigration detention not only more humane, but also more efficient and better for detainees, staff, contractors, ICE staff, and our country. Our team resolved issues of insufficient food, helped people in detention access medical care, addressed staffing issues, leaky roofs, and mold. We saw problems early, de-escalated conflicts, and helped avoid litigation. Eliminating OIDO has removed this critical layer of accountability. We've already seen the consequences. Already, since February of this year, we have seen 9 deaths in ICE custody at least. Meanwhile, DHS is expanding detention, turning to military bases and foreign prisons. And even members of Congress are being blocked from conducting oversight. But it has not stopped there. On March 15th, over 235 men disappeared from the United States into Secot, a notorious prison in El Salvador, at the hands of DHS. President Bukele himself has said the only way out is in a body bag. Together and Free is in contact with the families of 130 of these men. They began reaching out to us on March 16th after seeing videos mocking the suffering of their loved ones posted by President Bukele and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The U.S. publicly labeled these men as members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, but has presented no evidence, as you heard, and provided no chance for defense. Most of the men were mid-asylum proceedings and were deported before their court dates. The U.S. government admits that most have had no criminal record. Some appear to be identified solely based on tattoos that you might find on any young man walking the streets of this country. A crown, a child's name, a date of birth, or even a Barcelona soccer logo. I spoke with the mother whose sons, aged 18 and 20, were detained by ICE on their way to help do hair and makeup for a friend's music video. Another mother told me that her son was detained while riding his brand new bicycle for the first and maybe only time. Many had followed the rules. They had TPS or work authorization and were detained when they went to an ICE check-in. It has now been 88 days. Many Americans may have moved on from this event because so many things are happening. But these families think about their sons, partners, fathers, or brothers every day and hope and pray that they are still alive. The government has not provided an official accounting of who was disappeared to Secot. And this, to me, feels very similar to the family separation that I experienced and observed under the first Trump administration, where the administration did not keep track of the families that they tore apart. I worry that these families will never get certainty about their disappeared family members unless we take action. And let me be very clear. DHS could bring every single one of those men back to the United States immediately if they wanted to. Instead, they continue attempts to deport people to other dangerous third countries that are not their own, like Libya and South Sudan. After a court stopped the removal of 8 men to South Sudan, DHS placed them in a shipping container in Djibouti, where they have been held in shackles 24 hours a day for over 2 weeks. They haven't been allowed to speak to their attorneys. And even ICE has complained that the guards that are guarding them are living in dangerous conditions. But this crisis is one of the government's own making. Instead of flying the men back to the United States to provide them with a due process ordered by a court and resolving the issue, DHS has simply rotated staff and left these men detained behind. Why does all of this matter? Because this is a dangerous misuse of the Alien Enemies Act, a concern already raised by multiple courts. Because due process is not optional. Our Constitution guarantees it to everyone on U.S. soil, not just U.S. citizens. Because U.S. taxpayers are funding the detention of people in conditions that violate U.S. laws and values, and the administration is preventing all oversight, including that of U.S. congressmen, and allowing the government to strip legal protections from one group, which means they could do it to any of us. The president has already suggested sending U.S. citizens to Secot. This is not hyperbole, and it is not a joke. It is real, and failing to act puts our freedoms and democracy at risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCord.
Thank you, Senators. Thank you for inviting me today. As you noted, I served decades at the Department of Justice before founding ICAP at Georgetown Law 8 years ago, where we used litigation and policy work to defend constitutional rights and to ensure accountability for our governmental institutions. I'm here today to talk about the Trump administration's multifaceted deportation policy that threatens the fundamental constitutional rights of not just citizens, but non-citizens. Start with the President's use of Title 10, Section 12406 of the United States Code to prospectively federalize the National Guard to protect ICE agents and federal property during First Amendment protected protests anywhere in the country. Saturday's presidential memorandum asserts that protests or acts of violence in response to ICE raids constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the United States, a prerequisite to federalizing National Guard troops under Section 12406, if they directly inhibit the execution of the laws. Although there could be protest activity directed at the government that becomes so pervasively violent that it might qualify as a rebellion, such as the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6th, 2021, the presidential memorandum does not refer to any particular ongoing protest in any particular location, not even Los Angeles, where the National Guard has now been federalized and deployed, nor does it provide any other support for such a conclusion. Instead, it purports to apply to protests that, quote, are occurring or are likely to occur based on current threat assessments and planned operations, unquote. And it gives the Secretary of the Defense the power to use regular armed forces to augment the National Guard, which the Secretary has now used to send 700 Marines into California. With the total number of federalized National Guard and Marines at 4,700, far outnumbering the most protesters that have been seen at any given protest. This assault on fundamental First Amendment rights of citizens and non-citizens is unprecedented, beyond the authority delegated by Congress and meant to quash protected speech. Next, consider the President's Alien Enemies Act proclamation, used to remove Venezuelan detainees alleged to be members of Tren de Aragua to Seacoast. Setting aside for now whether the Alien Enemies Act can be used in this way, all 9 members of the United States Supreme Court agreed that the detainees are constitutionally entitled to due process of law. That means notice that they are subject to removal under the Act within a reasonable time and in such a manner to allow them to seek judicial review before their removal occurs. The fundamental right to due process protects everyone, not just Venezuelan detainees, before the government deprives someone of life, liberty, or property. The administration's attempt to summarily remove other detainees to Libya and South Sudan, and its mistaken removal of Kilmar Abrego Garcia without due process are additional violations of due process rights. The justifications given that detainees are terrorists or criminals is not an excuse. Indeed, the Fourth Circuit Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson III, writing about Abrego Garcia, cautioned, quote, if today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And this is not all. The administration has attempted to summarily strip foreign students and researchers of their visas for engaging in First Amendment protected activity on university campuses. It has threatened criminal investigations of so-called sanctuary cities that choose as a matter of public safety not to voluntarily cooperate with federal immigration officials beyond what is required by federal law. It has charged a state judge for allegedly obstructing ICE's attempt to arrest an immigrant appearing in her courtroom, and it has charged a U.S. Congress member with assaulting an ICE officer during attempted oversight at a detention center. These actions have consequential impacts on First Amendment rights, as well as principles of federalism, separation of powers, and the rule of law. Finally, no hearing on these topics would be complete without discussing President Trump's executive order purporting to reinterpret the 14th Amendment to deny citizenship to newborn children and list at least one parent is a citizen or a lawful permanent resident, even if both parents are here lawfully but temporarily. Denying citizenship to newborns would irreparably harm not only them and their families, who may face deportations and family separation. It would also impact newborns of U.S. citizens for whom a birth certificate would no longer be sufficient proof of citizenship. Immediate legal challenges, including one brought by my organization, ICAP, resulted in nationwide preliminary injunctions based on the order's blatant violation of the plain text of the 14th Amendment, 125-year-old binding Supreme Court precedent, a congressional statute, and centuries of historical practice. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thanks, Ms. McCord. Senator from California is recognized.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. I'm going to set the stage for my first question by sharing something that's probably not news to most people that are here in the room, but for the record, there has been an unprecedented number of arrests taking place over the last several weeks at immigration court dates, hearings, and regular check-ins. These arrests are specifically targeting immigrants who are trying to comply with our immigration laws, people who are showing up to have their day in court and present the evidence to a judge. This is the United States justice system, after all, where you get a fair shot to make your case in court. But instead, the Trump administration is sabotaging the right to due process. People who have active cases are having their cases totally dismissed, and when they walk out of that courtroom, ICE agents are waiting to arrest them and thrown into removal proceedings before they could ever make their case before a judge. This should raise alarm for everyone listening. People are being deprived of their day in court. This is no accident. It's a deliberate strategy to wash away the cornerstone of the U.S. Constitution just because due process is inconvenient for Trump's agenda. My question is for Ms. Brane. How is this abuse of dismissals by ICE different from previous uses of dismissals? And is this a concerning change in practice, and why?
Thank you very much for the question. It is a drastic change from previous practice. So generally speaking, when a case is dismissed, that is seen as a finding that it's not worth pursuing, that the grounds that the government was charging may not be sufficient, or that you're going to provide the person with an opportunity to pursue another avenue. And so I think initially when people were receiving dismissals, there was some confusion or even sense of relief. I'll be able to pursue my asylum claim separately as an affirmative claim, perhaps. But instead, as you noted, people are immediately being arrested upon leaving the courtroom and charged with put through a different process of expedited removal, a faster sort of rocket docket of proceedings that provide less due process for people and don't provide them the opportunity to go through the process they had been prepared for. They're also resulting in these cases in immediate detentions, again, as you noted, upon leaving the courtroom. And many times this is resulting in separation from families, children who are present, and we're expecting to go through a normal process, and so are traumatized by the process.
So what do these actions suggest in terms of President Trump and his administration's respect for due process?
It's disrespect for due process and basically deciding not to follow the procedures that don't fit with their agenda and making up their own.
Thank you. Speaking of due process, when a president ignores court orders, detains people without hearings, and uses made-up emergencies to get around the law, it's not just about immigration enforcement anymore. It raises real concerns about whether the basic constitutional rules that protect all of us are being dismantled. And if President Trump can take those rights from people he views as the most vulnerable or politically unpopular, what's to stop him from coming after anybody else next? Question for Ms. McCord. In your view, how do these due process violations fit into a larger pattern of the administration trying to put itself above the law? And what does that mean for the rights of U.S. citizens going forward?
Well, certainly I think what we've seen is an escalation in failing to follow the proper due process procedures, oftentimes in the name of national security. I would say hiding behind this guise of national security. Call people terrorists, call them criminals, and maybe Americans won't care. They can be deported without notice. No one is going to call their senators. No one's going to protest because they're terrorists and criminals. But the label terrorists and criminals does not mean a person is a terrorist or a criminal. And that's why judges across the country have found, including our U.S. Supreme Court, that due process is a fundamental right. It's what our system of laws is built on. It's critical to the rule of law. And that's why 9 members of the Supreme Court have agreed that due process must be provided. I fear that this continued failure to follow due process in the name of national security will expand beyond where it has been so far.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator, for joining us. I know you have to catch a plane for obvious reasons back in the return to California. But thank you for your participation. Ms. Cristobal, what a heartbreaking story you've told us. 2.5 weeks in prison or jail for you. Were there any others in like circumstances that had been arrested by ICE or authorities for immigration issues?
Yes, there was many in the same situation. A lot of them ripped away from the comfort of their own home. A lot of them walking on the side of the street, and a lot of them went to their court date and got ripped away there. So there's a lot of people being taken by ICE.
You were pulled over for a traffic violation.
Yes, I was one that I didn't commit.
You came to this country at the age of 4.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember the family discussion about coming to the United States?
No, I don't have any memory before the age of 7 or 8.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
So I look at your situation, and there's only one ray of hope in the whole thing. When you say your community rallied around you, even those who were maybe not politically on your side. Tell us about that.
It enlightened people from my community that this isn't an immigration problem, it's a human rights problem. There was a lot of conservatives who thought they were voting to get criminals out of the country and protect the United States. And whenever they saw that a 19-year-old student, active member of that community, was taken to a detention center, they quickly realized that it wasn't the right thing to do and that it was more a human rights issue rather than an immigration issue.
We hear so much reporting about ICE activities, some reactions, demonstrations, and I hope they're peaceful. But we don't hear enough about what you just told us there. This eye-opening experience where people who thought we were going after murderers and rapists and terrorists and mentally ill people who were going to do us harm, and it turns out they're going after a 19-year-old who likes to do running and is involved in school activities and working toward her degree. That, I think, is an eye-opener for so many people. It doesn't make sense. They wanted the members of the gang taken off the street, and instead they went after you. I'm sorry that you lived through this experience. Ms. Smith, this situation described by Senator Padilla is one that I've heard about in our state of Illinois, where people are responding to the notice of the court to appear. They're complying with what they believe to be the law of the land, show up in court, and if the charges, as Ms. Brane explained, are dismissed against them, it appears that they're arrested on the spot and taken away. Have you seen this yourself?
I've heard reports from my colleagues, yes, in Chicago, that ICE has been in the hallways of the Chicago Immigration Court with a box full of handcuffs, ready to arrest people as they leave their immigration proceedings. And so our clients are calling our office saying, what do I do? Do I go to my master calendar hearing or do I not? Do I follow the law and attend court the way I was planning to? Or if I do that, am I going to be arrested by ICE and therefore now I'm afraid to follow the law the way I was planning to follow it?
An absolute catch-22. They tell you to go to court, you go to court, they dismiss the claim and arrest you on the spot. Franz Kafka would have a ball with this one. This is so awful, and what a miscarriage of justice that it's been. Ms. McCord, as we look at the options the president has turned to exercise the use of military authority here, what your argument is, we don't have the rebellion, we don't have the invasion, we don't have the statutory basis for the use of this. How and when do you think this will be resolved in court?
Well, we know that the state of California and Governor Newsom has sued the administration for an injunction to stop this unlawful federalization of the National Guard and the use of the military. That hearing is scheduled for tomorrow at 1:30 Pacific time. The judge there knows that this is an emergency, and I suspect he will rule very quickly. But as you know, that will only be the beginning of this. This is something where we can expect this will go up and likely eventually be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. They're finished with their normal calendar, but their emergency docket remains very active, and so it could be a matter of just really weeks.
So I would close before I turn over to my colleagues and say this. I'm frustrated by the fact that the president is doing this without legal or constitutional authority. I'm frustrated by the fact that we are in the minority in Congress and can't have a fulsome debate of the whole committee and the consideration of legislation. But I'm heartened by the fact that this president has lost over 90% of the cases which he has brought to court to try to enforce his executive orders. He's issued a record number, over 150 executive orders in just a few months, and I'm sure he'll continue to do that to flood the zone, as they call it. But the courts have responded, as I've said, with over 90% of the cases finding against the president, which is encouraging. At the same time, there are those who argue, oh, those are political judges. You hear that from the White House. The fact of the matter is, over 70% of the judges appointed by Republican presidents have been ruling against the president as well, 80% from Democratic presidents, so it's close. So I would just say, don't give up. Keep your wits about you as this terrible situation unfolds. My feeling for the victims, like Ms. Cristobal, is personal and emotional, but we've got to keep a steady hand on the controls here and move toward a constitutional resolution. I believe that the senator from New Jersey is the next one present.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm grateful for the witnesses that are here. I'm grateful for others as well. We are in a crisis moment for the United States of America, for our Constitution, and for our shared values. And we see this by a president who's pursuing a course that violates our laws, that violates our morals and our ideals, that is an attack on our Constitution, that is bringing chaos, corruption, and cruelty to the fore in the United States. I'm grateful to hear the comments by my colleagues and the responses that have been given by our witnesses today, but let's just be clear, the deployment of the National Guard and military troops was an unlawful exercise of authority. It was an action that is provocative and creating more of a crisis than it is solving, when even the police leader of Los Angeles is saying that this makes it harder for them to do their job, is a testimony to Donald Trump's end not being strength in our streets, security in our streets. It is a testimony to what he's really trying to do, is create more and more of a provocation and more of a cause for him to violate our laws. Just last month, we know that Los Angeles is not an isolated incident, because all around the country we're seeing flaunting of the law. Just last month, the DOJ took the unprecedented step of arresting the mayor of my city, Newark, New Jersey, outside an immigration detention center. The DOJ charged a United States Congresswoman, LaMonica McIver, who was exercising her congressional oversight authority to inspect that detention facility. And as people rushed out, agents rushed out to wrongfully arrest a mayor, catching her up in the process, and now they're bringing charges against her. Trump brought us to the precipice of a constitutional crisis when he deported more than 250 people to an El Salvadorian prison under the Alien Enemies Act without allowing them to appear before the judge, 50 of whom came into this country legally. And when a unanimous Supreme Court ordered him to bring back the individuals who by the government's own admissions had been mistakenly deported, home to avail himself of the constitutional mandated process he was entitled to, the president refused to comply. The price that we are paying right now is immeasurable, but I see it all around New Jersey. Our streets are less safe. Our economy is being severely hit. We have victims of crimes who are afraid to come forward to bear witness against the person who victimized them. We are seeing law enforcement resources invaluable to stopping crime being pulled away from other agencies and directed to the invasion of schools and courts, as we've just heard, to tearing apart the fabric of our community, not to get criminals, not to get violent gang members, but to separate families and to, in so many instances, truly undermine the very people who give strength to our communities and our neighborhoods. And so I am doing what my other colleagues are doing. We need to sound the alarm. This is not isolated pockets of activity. This is a larger, comprehensive effort to go through that is trying to undermine our Constitution, our values, and slip us further and further towards authoritarian rule. And so I want to ask again, and I think it's really important, Ms. McCord, the legal work that you're involved in. And I just want to just to clarify this point I made about the declaring of national emergencies that are being done. First of all, the circumstances in Los Angeles and early Saturday, there was no clear following of the rule, and I think it's Title 10, Section 12406. It is a clear, if you read that statute, violation to be sending in the National Guard around the governor's office, correct?
Excuse me, the statute requires that orders to federalize the National Guard must be issued through the governor, and at least based on the governor's allegations in the lawsuit, he was bypassed.
And then I want to be respectful to my colleagues because my time is pretty much out, but for Americans to think that a president who violates the laws and the rights of marginalized people, that does not implicate them and their constitutional rights, could you do me a favor when it comes to his using trumped up reasons to declare national emergencies? If the president continues in this way, there are over 150 powers that become available to him, including things like suspending the Clean Air Act or taking possessions of certain lands for war purposes or shutting down domestic transportation. There's a scenario, do you think, where the president could declare an emergency and postpone or delay an election even? Is that correct?
Well, that's untested, but the emergency powers are capacious. I don't think Congress ever intended them to be that capacious, but this is, I think, an important point, as you indicate, because this is not all about non-citizens, right? This is about the impact of presidential action on all of us, including citizens, and our rights, our constitutional rights, including the right to vote.
And that's what I want to conclude on. Again, the courage, again, of Ms. Arias Cristobal, it's extraordinary. You are an extraordinary American, showing extraordinary courage. But I think the point I want to drive home here is if we do not show public outrage, he will continue to push to get away with things. That's why a lot of people that he has arrested and detained have been released actually because of the public outrage. This is a man that is saying it is unpatriotic, un-American to protest. When a president is violating the Constitution and the law of the land, to be silent is what is un-American. Patriotic is to show, being patriotic in a time like this is to show dissent, peaceful, lawful, but dissent is necessary if we are going to stop this president from his continued encroachments into the constitutional violations that he's doing. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the indulgence in that of my colleagues.
Thanks, Senator Booker. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thanks to my colleagues from California for speaking with such moral clarity, and to Senator Booker for what he has said just now. And I think that we should all agree that silence is complicity. We have an obligation to speak out, stand up. Otherwise, all of our rights will be in jeopardy. And of course, none of us sympathize with any form of violence. We believe peaceful protest is a form of free expression. It's deeply rooted in our law as well as our tradition. And defending that right to peaceful protest, not violence, is woven into the fabric of our laws. What's happening here is that in many respects, the president's taking advantage of loopholes and somewhat vaguely written sections of the law relating to insurrection. And I believe that we ought to tighten those laws. That's the reason that I will be introducing tomorrow morning an insurrection reform bill with the support of Senators Schiff and Padilla, as well as others who are on the Judiciary Committee and the Armed Services Committee, because actually Title X is an armed services title because it affects the powers of our armed services, and I think that it needs to be reformed. But I want to focus for the moment on the due process issue here, and to ask Ms. McCord, you know, I have been absolutely struck by the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. Whether he's a citizen or not, he's entitled to due process, correct?
That's right, Senator.
And the United States Supreme Court basically said the government of the United States should facilitate his return, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And then for 2 months, the United States Supreme Court was defied by the government of the United States. Isn't that contempt of court?
Well, this is what I know Judge Zenas is looking into in Maryland, and the government has made various arguments along the way. It has withheld some supposed evidence that would go to this question of whether it was actually in contempt, which of course comes down to whether the United States government had the power and the authority to get Mr. Abrego Garcia back. He is now back. They had that power and authority.
And they have the power to bring back others who have been deported illegally as well, correct?
This experience certainly seems to say that.
I can't help but quote Judge Harvey Wilkinson, whom you cite in your testimony, because as we all know, Harvey Wilkinson is not exactly a left-leaning, sort of wild-eyed liberal judge, and he said, quote, "If today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home?" That's why silence is complicity, in my view. I want to turn to another area. Ms. Brane, you worked with my office on the separation policy of the Trump administration in its first term. And my understanding is that a lot of those kids who were separated from their parents are still separated. Do you have an estimate as to how many are still without reuniting with their parents?
Thank you for that question, sir. We did indeed work together before I went into the administration. It's a tricky question for me to answer very specifically right now because I don't have a lot of those numbers in front of me anymore. But we did reunify over 800 of the children that were still separated when I entered as the director of the Family Reunification Task Force. We also identified up to 1,000 additional children that had not been documented. Many of those children, we continue to have no record on whether they were reunified or not. So it is possible that they found their way together, as many did, because they weren't waiting around for the government to do that for them. But it is very possible that many of those families are still separated, and we will never know the real answer.
My time has expired, but I just want to comment finally. In the annals of American governmental injustices, the family separation policy will go down as one of the most cruel and reckless and irresponsible, to separate children from their parents and then to reunite them only reluctantly and only after vast damage was done to those children through trauma and sometimes physical injury, and to leave many children still separated is absolutely the height of cruelty and lack of due process. So I think we need to be on guard against a repetition of that policy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Schiff of California.
Thank you, Senator Durbin, for holding this very important hearing. As we undertake this hearing today in my hometown of Los Angeles, there are thousands of California National Guard that have been federalized over the opposition of the governor. There are hundreds of Marines who've been mobilized. And the predicament that we are in Los Angeles, in my view, all goes back to a foundational lie of the Trump campaign. And it was really the original lie of the Trump campaign, and one that he spoke as he descended that golden escalator as he ran for his first term, in which he pejoratized everyone coming to this country as an immigrant or a migrant as some kind of a murderer or a rapist or a violent criminal. The reality is, of course, that people that immigrate and migrate to this country have a lower crime rate than people who are born here. But that foundational lie is at the heart of where we are today. The president promised in this most recent campaign that he would focus on deporting violent criminals. He also promised mass deportations. And the only way you can square those two things is going back to that foundational lie. The idea that the mass of people that come here as migrants and immigrants are somehow violent criminals. But of course, that's not the case. And so what the administration has resorted to is not an effort to look for people who have violated the law in a violent way, but rather to engage in these broad sweeps of people, targeting people at their workplaces, going to elementary and middle schools, separating parents from their children. I sat down with the children of farm workers whose fathers had been deported away from them, who were stopped at random traffic stops. Often the ICE officers said they were looking for someone else than the person they pulled over, but it didn't matter. And indeed, increasingly we see U.S. citizens among those who are swept up because of their ethnic origin, who often have to spend days in custody before they can prove their U.S. citizenship and be released. But compounding the inhumanity of the execution of this policy and the defamation of everyone who's ever come to this country as an immigrant or migrant, you now have the administration's abuse of the military, something we haven't seen before in this country, not in this manner. There have been other occasions back in the 1960s when a president has countermanded a governor and federalized a guard, but that was to integrate schools over a segregationist governor's opposition. We've never seen anything like this, let alone the mobilization of Marines to deal with violent agitators who have, like a moth to the flame, gone to peaceful protest to create havoc and engaged in acts of vandalism and assaults on law enforcement for which they should be arrested and prosecuted. Violence has no place in any of this. But by federalizing the Guard, what the president is doing is seeking to inflame the public, seeking to stir up even more chaos to justify even more harsh of a response. This is classic Donald Trump creating a crisis so that he can attempt to ride in and pretend that he is riding to the rescue to solve the problem he has created. But of course, what is left in the wake is the shattering of so many lives of people whose families have been separated from one another. To me, among the most heartbreaking stories was that of a California middle schooler who goes to an immigration appointment with his father, and the father is grabbed at the immigration appointment and deported away from his son. And you see this happen, and you wonder, what country are we watching? Or you witness in Massachusetts, masked ICE agents chasing a mother and separating her from her daughter. This is not who we are. I don't believe this is what people voted for. I think people voted for a secure border, which is important. I think people voted to deport people who are violent and commit violent acts in this country. They didn't vote to separate children from their parents. They didn't vote to militarize domestic law enforcement. They didn't vote to violate the Constitution and the law. They didn't vote for dictatorship or the road to authoritarianism. They didn't vote for any of this. They voted for lower prices, and they haven't gotten it. Instead, they've gotten this. And I'm so grateful for your testimony, for putting a human face on the inhumanity of this policy. I'm grateful for all of your advocacy. They're targeting advocacy organizations. They're targeting anyone who speaks out in opposition to their harsh policies. And, Mr. Chairman, I've already exceeded my time, but would you permit me one question, Mr. Chairman? Only one. Okay. Well, I would ask this because I think at the heart of what we're seeing in Los Angeles is not just an attack on immigrant communities, an attack on people who are vulnerable, but also an attack on our democracy, the militarization of our democracy. And so, Ms. McCord, if I could ask you, there are laws like the Posse Comitatus law that say you can't use the military for domestic law enforcement. What are the reasons behind those laws? Why don't we want the military to be engaged in garden variety law enforcement?
This goes back to the founding, Senator. This is a country that was founded on the principle that we did not want our military engaging in domestic law enforcement. We did not want them to be, doing this at potentially the behest of corrupt politicians who would use that authority. And so that's why Congress passed the Posse Comitatus Act, like you said, that makes it actually criminal for the military to engage in domestic law enforcement unless there's a constitutional or statutory exception. Congress created that with the Insurrection Act, but President Trump has not invoked the Insurrection Act. He has used this other statutory procedure that seems not to actually have ever been designed for having federalized National Guard engage in domestic law enforcement, and certainly not without the governor's participation in that decision. And it does seem to be an end run around Congress's authority in Article 1 to call forth the militia, to establish the militia being the National Guard. It does seem an end run around that to be able to federalize in this situation and potentially use those forces for domestic law enforcement. I will say the presidential memorandum purports to limit the authority to protecting ICE agents, federal functions, and federal property, but there is a slippery slope between that type of protection and the things we think of as classic domestic law enforcement, like search, seizure, arrest, detention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hirono?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for testifying. Mr. Chairman, I do recall the many hours and weeks that three of us, at least, on the Judiciary Committee spent marking up the Comprehensive Immigration Bill in 2013. And as far as I'm concerned, that was the last time when this Congress, in a bipartisan way, and you were very much a part of the drafting of that bill, in a comprehensive way to deal with the subject of immigration in a way that was humane, that created a path to citizenship of some 11 million undocumented people who are here living peacefully but in the shadows. So we have seen with this administration, as far as I'm concerned, a total abuse of power on the immigration front, using laws that do not apply, such as the Alien Enemies Act, to justify his deportations of people, the random traffic stops. You have heard all of the different ways that there is this abuse of power, warrantless searches, U.S. citizens being swept up by ICE. In Hawaii, we had a group of teachers who were terrorized, basically, erroneously, because it was thought that they had somehow come into our country with, like, I suppose, some ill design. So, I could ask you very specific questions about what happens when due process is not followed, et cetera. But I thought that I would ask you, knowing that all of these abuses of powers is taking place by this regime, and how would you describe, for each of you, how would you describe this regime's immigration policy that should concern the American people? How would you describe this regime's policy to awaken the American people's coming forward to say, wait a minute, this is not how it should be? Let's go down the list, starting with Ms. Cristobal.
I don't really have a clear answer to that, as I'm not very educated on that topic. But that I'll let the next
I don't want to
person-
put you on a spot, but we can go down the line of the people who provided testimony today.
Well, Senator, it's extremely concerning to me and my colleagues, and should be to everyone, that an office that was established by Congress to do oversight to ensure that the Constitution is abided by was referred to by a spokesperson of the department as essentially, I'll read it again, that we obstructed immigration enforcement by adding bureaucratic hurdles. We weren't established for that. We were established to provide advice, to collaborate with our colleagues, to make recommendations. And that is not happening. And that fact alone is of great concern.
Ms. Smith? No, Ms. Tostado?
Yes, what we're seeing with our clients
Oh, I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name. Go ahead.
Yes, what we're seeing with our clients and what I would describe this immigration policy to be is to arrest and detain as many people as possible. Never mind that they entered lawfully. Never mind that they might be U.S. citizens. Never mind that they're following the law and that they're applying for legal status in the United States. Never mind that they're separating parents from their children, like my client, Mr. F., who's left his children without a parent to care for them. And put them in detention and make the conditions so bad and not give them any access to their lawyers, not give them any due process, but make the conditions so bad that they would rather go back to the country they fled from than stay indefinitely in a U.S. detention center in horrible conditions.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. I would say that this administration is exerting and flexing their power in order to terrorize the population and demonstrate what they can do to people who stand up against them. And I would also just say, and give an example, because I think sometimes due process can seem abstract to the average citizen. But if you tell any American that their friend is being accused of some horrible crime, and then when their friend tries to say, but I didn't, and they cut off and told, nope, you don't get to respond. I said that that's what you did, and so you are going fair. And that's what due process is. And what we saw with the removal and disappearance, as I refer to it, of Venezuelans to SECOT is exactly that. We don't know. For all we know, there could be U.S. citizens sitting in SECOT because none of those men ever had an opportunity to say, wait a second, that's not what I did, and that's not who I am.
Ms. McCord?
Thank you, Senator. I think that this administration's start of its term with such a mass deportation policy, with so many different facets that violate due process rights of non-citizens, calling them to process to have to prove that.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that is one of the challenges we face, that terms such as due process are not necessarily understood by the American people, and maybe they buy the idea that this is a regime, I do call it a regime on purpose, that this is a regime that that says, oh, we're just doing this to protect your security, to protect your safety, and that you buy that unless there is a way that we can communicate to the American people that what is happening is that it could happen to them. That when we do not provide the kind of procedures that enable somebody to argue and put up a fight, at least, that they come for you next, kind of a way to communicate. So I think that is a challenge that we face, Mr. Chairman, because we know that there is illegality that is going on with this administration. And, as I said, the only thing that stands between us and the complete illegality of this regime are the courts. And by the way, I did hear our senator from California, talk about the calling up of the National Guard, et cetera, and the use of the military for domestic purposes for law enforcement. And when we in the Armed Services Committee had the Secretary of the Army before us, and I asked the Secretary, do you commit to not allowing the military, our forces, to be used for domestic law enforcement? He would not commit to that. And in fact, he said, I will do what is legal. And he said, the thing is that we have a president who thinks that everything he wants is legal. That is no reassurance. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you all for coming to this hearing. I'm struck by one thing I'd like to say in closing. I was involved in the Gang of Eight effort 12 or 13 years ago to write a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I think we did a pretty good job. We passed it with bipartisan roll call in the Senate. The House refused to take it up. That was the end of the story. But at the heart of it was that we called on the 11 million undocumented people in the United States to step forward, identify themselves to our government, tell the government who you are, where you live, what you do for a living, sign up to pay your taxes, pay a fine to process your application, and then you are allowed to legally work and live in America without fear of deportation. We didn't promise you citizenship until a long period of time. I think it was 20 years. But it was a goal that you could reach if you didn't commit a crime or do anything to disqualify yourself. At the heart of it, was the confidence we had in the American people that if their government said, we will take you in to register and tell us who you are and where you work, that we will keep our word, our part of the bargain, our due process. I think of it now and wonder, would it work today if we are going through what we're going through, where innocent people stopped for a traffic violation which you didn't commit, end up 2.5 weeks in jail, and God knows what else it might have done to you. And you think to yourself, if you can't trust the government now in this mass deportation, will we ever reach the point where that comprehensive immigration reform idea could work in America? Well, I'll be very blunt with you. It would take new leadership in this country. It would take someone at the head of this government that you trusted, whose word would be good. Because what is happening now is a full-scale assault on the constitutional principles that put this country together, a full-scale assault. When we say due process, we mean the whole kit and caboodle, the whole bag. The Miranda warnings and all the parts go with it when it comes to criminal prosecution. And that, to me, is something you can't compromise on, and we're testing it with a president who will go to a court and ask permission, and the court will say no, and he ignores it for days and weeks at a time. It is a constitutional challenge. I would call it a constitutional crisis. That's my estimate of it. But even at the worse than the constitutional crisis, if there is such a thing, is the fact that the people of this country really wonder if they can trust our government in the future based on this conduct. So we have to do our best. Many of you may swear at your television screen, may see our pictures, and they say, I wish that senator would do more. I hear that a lot, even from my wife. And she's right, because there are very few of us who have any authority left in this government, and we have to use it, and use it in a responsible, thoughtful, constitutional way. So have heart that we had this hearing, brought it together, and we'll have more. To our panel, thanks. You did a great job. You all came in and contributed a great deal to it. So we'll stand in recess until another time soon when we get together and monitor the developments. Thank you all very much.